Welcome back to SEEK Bytes. This is season 2 of our software engineering journey, our podcast by engineers for engineers. And today we're going to be talking about side projects. How do you get involved in a side project? How do you keep the motivation to keep doing it? Do you do some for work, a bit of extra cash on the side? I'm Elliott Miller. I'm joined by Seamus and Will. Welcome back to season 2. We are back for season 2 of SEEK Bytes. We took a bit of a break there. We were going to announce that we were taking a break on the ending of the last episode we released, and then we ended up cutting it. So welcome. Thank you for listening to the end of season 1, hopefully. And welcome to season 2 of SEEK Bytes. So it's going to be bigger and better than ever.
We're going to have lots of guests.
Bigger and better. But the thing is, we're trying some new formats this time. We're trying maybe shorter episodes, bigger episodes, but maybe a bit shorter, to really hone into the bytes aspect of this SEEK Bytes.
It's not really a bite if you have to sit there for an hour.
Yeah, right?
What even is a bite? It's a munch.
Yeah, I can eat
it's
food.
8 bits.
2 minutes tops, That's how long it takes me to eat something.
Oh, fantastic.
What do we got on today? What's our topic, Elliott?
All right, so today I wanted to talk about side projects. They always end up unfinished because what happens is I lack the motivation to finish them unless there's an actual goal. If I'm doing something at work, I have a Jira, I have a deliverable, I actually have some reason to complete it. When it's my own side project, I have to have the time, energy, and motivation to go off and do it. One of my side projects is I was making a text-based RPG, kind of like a Dark Master Zork clone that was cat-themed. And I called it Buttons because, my wife, at the time, I was like, I need an idea for a game. I want to make one. And she said, make a cat game. And I was like, okay. So it's like, ooh, I'll make a cat RPG. And there'll be all these different sorts of cats. I could have like tabbies that could be like tanky. And then I could have, the idea was that each breed of cat could be its own class and it could have your rogues, your archers, your tanky stuff. So
I'm like that too. I get really excited about a project and I start to get carried away with like, we can do all these things. And then a day in, I'm like, that's so far away.
Yeah, I've just set up the project now. All right, I've just set up linting.
Yep.
Yeah, let me think about what I actually want to write in this.
Decision fatigue is kind of what kicks in because it's like there's so many different options about how I could implement it. Basically, I wanted to implement the command pattern because I thought, this makes a lot of sense for the user is going to input an action and that's going to run a command which will modify the game state in some way, shape or form, and there'll be like validation on that. I was doing it all in C# at the time because, C# great and I love it. And just this decision fatigue of, should I do it this way or this way? All these little decisions, and I ended up being like,
When you say side projects, are you talking specifically about projects you do in your free time outside of work, or are you also talking about projects that you're doing inside of work, but it is kind of on the side? It's not part of your main work. Both of them.
Because I've got a good example of one from work that I've actually delivered and made some really good progress on.
All right.
That one is called the SEEK Conductor, which the name is a bit weird.
Weird. I love that name, Conductor. That was so good.
So
Toot.
It originally started out, Mike Feliciano, who's one of the great engineers here at SEEK, he had made this thing for one of our teams and it was called the TS Conductor. It's essentially a Slack bot that pulls in data from a bunch of different sources and pumps out a Slack message based on however you configure it. So at the time it was pretty much hard-coded to be like, here's some info about GitHub, here's some security metrics, like here's some snick and renovate stuff. This highlights what quiet achievers there might be in the team for it's like, that dude, in the last 30 days has reviewed like 90 PRs. That's huge, right? Or has done a lot of renovates, this kind of thankless task. So those quiet achievers can then get recognition or be able to highlight that, I'm contributing a lot even if it's not really visible. So I saw that and I went, I really like this. I want to steal it. But it was hard-coded specifically for that team. And then over the course of a year, I was casually working on it on the side. The barrier to entry was so high. You had to go and manually generate all these auth tokens for various sources. And then you had to configure it in just the right way and then set up a bunch of, boring stuff I'm not going to talk about. And it was like, all I should need is a config file. Like I want engineers to be able to just be like, I want this for my team, copy paste the config file that's there. That's eventually what I got it to. So then it was like, this really useful tool with a super low barrier to entry. And I think we've rolled out to like 21 teams now across SEEK that use it. And so This one's been really successful, but it was because there was a need. All the extensions I've made on it have been, well, there's been a need, and I go and solve that problem. So I'm really motivated to do it. Whereas when I don't have a need, it just kind of sits there on the side and doesn't get touched for a while and kind of gets neglected. So
I started a side project just a couple of weeks, like maybe a month ago, with all the enthusiasm in the world. And the intention was to build nothing, not actually anything functional that anyone needs.
This sounds already like...
But
right
the purpose was
Yeah.
just for me to play around with like patterns, me to play around with infrastructure and like go end to end, build a site from scratch myself with auth, security, and like build everything from scratch with as little pre-packaged stuff as possible so I could try and
Nice.
learn as much. And I was up till 4 a.m. a couple of nights, like a couple of weekends in a row, just with the same thing, like decision analysis paralysis on these tiny little decisions. And I ended up just like burning out after like 4 weekends in a row of like trying to build nothing because there was no motivation. There was nothing, like the idea of learning alone was not enough for me to want to spend any significant amount of time, especially not over a long period of time working on it. And I, like you were saying with the Conductor project, like if you've got something, a need, it's a lot easier, at least for me, it's a lot easier to motivate myself to go out of my way and work on something. But without an actual like practical application, I very quickly find myself being like, I could do something else.
yeah.
But side projects are the best way to learn.
Yeah, that's where I find where I enjoy them the most, is that learning. I've done a couple side projects in the past, small things, but I use that time to work on the things that I don't get to do here at SEEK. I play a lot of board games, so I made a little site that's a little helper for a specific board game. And it has a little deck, an event deck that you kind of go through. So during that time, I really wanted to polish it and make it look really nice, and I dabbled a lot more in animation, to make it feel like an actual deck of cards. Which is just something I don't get to do. And so that I very much agree. Like you need to have a purpose, something that you're going for. And it was small enough that I could work on it and make it nice and try some things that I'd never done before. I think like progressive web apps was another thing I hadn't like worked too much on. That's where a lot of side projects are fun. Particularly if you're just working it on your own. You've got so much room, so much flexibility. Just try new things and then come back 6 months later and be like, oh, I don't remember any of this stuff because I don't do it. I don't use it all the time. Have you brought any of those learnings back into your team here at work?
I think in general, there was definitely some things that I thought, oh, this would be a really cool way to do it. And then having done it for a side project, being like, yeah, no, it's not. That's not going to work as well. Yeah, definitely some learnings.
I think that's something that I picked up as well, like working in enterprise code bases for a long time. I think I didn't appreciate, or I didn't even fully realize how different the answers are to the same questions at smaller scale. When you have a smaller team, the problems are smaller, the budget is smaller. And that's kind of half why I started this nothing side project, was because I went through like a pseudo interview process just to test your skills, that kind of like how would you fare in an interview at Google, that kind of thing, and not as well as I would have liked, it turned out. And so like because the questions I was being asked were you're a team of one, you have no budget, how do you build this site, how do you scale this site? And that's not a problem I've ever had to solve in my career.
Yeah.
And I think that's where side projects can be really beneficial, is when you're trying to address problems in ways that are completely opposite to how you normally would in your work. So if you do very small scale stuff, I guess think about like try to learn about what enterprise architecture looks like compared to what you do. And then the inverse, the opposite. If you're coming from an enterprise environment, try thinking about how to solve problems when you don't have access to the resources that you have access to. Like you can't afford Datadog. You can't afford like crazy telemetry software, telemetry tracking tools. So you don't have access to information the same way. So you rely on things that are free. Like, well, you get CloudWatch out of the box. So why not just use CloudWatch? Why pay for an external thing? And I wouldn't have like come to these realizations if I didn't try tinkering around with a side project.
How do you go about, because you said that you worked on a side project at work, but it wasn't really to do with like the stuff you were working in team. How do you kind of find time to do that? Because I know so many teams, but particularly my team, we're feeling it. We're just under the pump. We have very little time to do the things that we have hanging over us. So just doing a side project on top of that is very tough. How have you gone about finding time to fit that in between your regular work within work hours?
Yeah, really good question. A couple of times, I would have to do it outside of work hours. But what I also did is I tried to get it into my OKRs and my outcomes because there was a need, right? Like we wanted to make sure we were always on and always secure. And it's like, therefore, we needed to make sure that we had zero SNCC vulnerabilities. And so there was kind of justification to be like, actually, if this tool can help me identify when we have issues, they will get triaged and fixed quicker. Therefore, if I can spend time on this and deliver it, it is meeting that outcome. So that helped because then I could justify it as part of my workload. Also, L&D time. My team's pretty good where we have like a 2-hour L&D block once a fortnight. But the biggest thing was probably talking to my manager and being like, hey, I really think this tool could be justified for an outcome. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. And then once it's an official outcome, it's like, well, you kind of have approval to go and do it. Over a couple of quarters, I was able to put time aside for it.
That's great.
I think like 10% of our time is supposed to be spent on learning, right? Like it's just a number. But the idea is that the business acknowledges that an aspect of what we do as part of our role is to continue to grow, because if they just got us to pump out work constantly, then we would stagnate and eventually our code would not be as good, wouldn't be as up to date, right? I think learning time, L&D time is a great time to try and explore side projects if it's if you're trying to achieve a learning thing. What I find difficult is when there's a side project you want to work on. It's not necessarily a learning thing, but you can see value in it and you just, like we've got internal tooling that was built just off the goodwill of people in their free time after hours, that kind of thing. And that tooling is integral to some of the functions that we serve at SEEK in engineering. And that's the biggest challenge that I find is how to get time to work on side projects that aren't part of your normal OKRs and outcomes, but definitely have value. Maybe don't fall under your team, but don't fall under any team. We were talking earlier this morning about, we've got this tool, Renovate, which is not like a SEEK tool. It's anyone can use it, but it raises PRs against your repos for any out-of-date dependencies that you have, which when you have a lot of microservices, that quickly becomes a large volume of PRs that you have to review, approve, build, deploy, all that kind of stuff. It's a problem we need to solve, but no one's necessarily sitting down and looking at it for the entire organization, but someone should. It's like, how do you justify that? How do you find time to do that when it's not part of your role, part of your remit? I think that's a challenge that I hear everybody has.
How does one go about finding inspiration to pick up a side project? There may be people out there who are like, I want to pick something up. I want to do something in my free time, but how have you guys gone about finding that thing to work on? I know you said you were working on nothing, essentially. Sounds like a Seinfeld episode, right?
Yeah, it does a little bit, doesn't it?
Project about nothing. But how do you go about finding that inspiration to start something and think that's the project I want to work on outside?
Having a problem to solve helps. There is this thing that's annoying me and I want to fix that, or it's like there's a thing that I feel I need that kind of incentivizes me. I actually found when I was searching for jobs, that was a very big incentive to go ahead and do a bunch of side projects, because then it was like, oh, well, here's, enterprise level code for a Connect 4 app, right? And it's like, okay, where was the motivation for that? And it's like, oh, well, I did a Connect 4 coding test X years ago at some other company. I took that idea and I was like, right, let's build an enterprise level just console app with really good solid coding and kind of TDD approach, and then be like, I'll build that and that can be on my GitHub account. And that's like, justified. It's like, look, I can write good code in a short amount of time.
Yeah, true. I guess GitHub, putting side projects are a good way to just have something on your GitHub as well, I guess, if you do want to showcase. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
For me, that's the biggest challenge. Is unless I'm solving something, unless there's something that's actually causing me an issue or causing friction that I'm trying to solve, I find it extremely hard to motivate myself to work on something, which is what I was saying before with that nothing project. The idea was not to get caught in the details of building a thing and just focus on doing everything from scratch and all the learning aspects, but I just found that wasn't in itself motivating enough. Some people might, some people will. They'll be that. Maybe that's a good idea for some people, is not to focus on the product you're building and just focus on everything else and learn all the ins and outs of how to deploy a standalone website with the kinds of functionality that you want to learn how to build. Like you've never done JWT tokens or certificate signing or any kind of security stuff. But for me, if I don't have an outcome that I'm trying to achieve, it's really hard to pull myself to the computer and sit down and write code.
Yeah.
This is kind of on the side of side projects. This is more like taking on side work. So I know, usually side projects are passionate, right? You do them, in your free time, you don't get paid for it. But how do you guys go about taking on side work, side gigs, jobs? For myself, I've a couple times worked on some sites for some people paid outside of work here at SEEK. Have you guys done that as well? And is that motivation different to your side projects as well?
For me, there was a period there after I'd had my son, so it was like 5-ish years ago, and there was a lot of kind of like random hours when I was awake. Anyway, so what ended up happening was I was playing a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links at the time, and there was a streamer who I was watching. He had a pretty decent website. He'd occasionally made the call out, there are some things we want to fix and blah, so if you're a web dev and you're interested. And so I was like, I'm a web dev, I could do this. It was a paid gig, so I'd do X amount of hours, I'd log the hours I did, and then I'd work with a handful of other random devs. We were like all over the globe, just working on this Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links website, improving it, adding features and this and that. It was a lot of fun. Like, it was touching tech that I hadn't really touched before, which was a bit of fun. And it was, there'd been various decisions and design choices that had been made where it was just like, well, the dude who first built it 4 years ago was really good at, say, Ruby. So a bunch of stuff was just written in Ruby. And I was like, I don't know Ruby, but now I get to touch and learn Ruby. Whereas before that, I'd never had any drive or desire to look at Ruby because I was like, I don't care. And so the motivation, obviously, to get paid there was one, but it was also fun to learn Ruby.
Did that fall off because you had enough, or did they just stop the contract, or what? How did that end?
Yeah, great question. I kind of ran out of time, life changes and whatnot, but it was good. It was a really great learning experience. I got to touch a bunch of technologies I hadn't really used. But what was really interesting is that thing Seamus mentioned earlier, which was the scale difference, right? So in this case, it was like, how can we do this as cheap as possible? Because when it initially started, they essentially didn't have any budget, and like they made the revenue through streaming and stuff. It was really interesting to be like, so how can we solve this problem in a way that scales but also is cheap? And there was just all these little problems that kind of came up.
We want to host our site and we want to make money off the hosting. How do we do that?
Yeah.
We want to make money. What about you, Seamus? Do you find the same motivation in doing side work as you do side projects?
I'm someone, I invest myself very heavily at work. So when I'm, like, whatever job I'm doing, I tend to be very, like, emotionally attached to the work that I'm doing. And I think for that reason, I'd end up doing side projects like we're doing right now. Like, the podcast is a side project, right? It's a, what did you call it? You said side project, side work. Yeah. It's, in a way, it's side work, right?
But I'm kind of more thinking specifically around like additional outside work.
Yeah, right. Like actually paid opportunities outside of work as opposed to like unpaid personal projects.
Yep.
No, not really. I haven't really historically. I mean, I've had periods of my life where I had 3 jobs at once. So it's not that I haven't done that. It's just that I don't, now that I've been in software for a while. And I think because I invest myself so heavily at work, I don't have any motivation at all really when it comes outside of work to continue doing projects, which is why I struggled so hard with the personal projects as well. I think monetary gain is obviously a big motivator for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But if you're already earning, more than you need to do whatever you want to do with your life, then that's not really no longer a thing that you care about so much. But I definitely have the envy of other people who work, I don't have the envy. I am envious of other people who can work on side projects and still be highly motivated in the office 9 to 5. I've seen my partner, her technical skills grow massively over the years that she worked on a side project because of the same kind of challenges that Elliott's talking about, like working on code that is horrible to work in and the challenges of trying to bring other engineers along on the journey of like what enterprise level code looks like, as well as the funding challenges of how do you solve these problems when you have no budget, that kind of stuff. So I definitely can see the value in it, but that in itself is also not motivating enough. I think like if I didn't have a job that allowed me to learn all the time while I'm growing, like if I wasn't growing constantly in my job, I would be much more highly motivated to do side projects. But it's been a long time. It's been a long time since I haven't been like well fed by my job, if that makes sense, both financially and, from an intellectual perspective.
Of course. Yeah, I feel like I sit kind of in the middle of you two, whereas you're like, I wouldn't do them because I'm not motivated. Elliott, you've done them because you enjoy them and you've done them for quite a while. I sit in the middle where the monetary gain is interesting. And I picked up some side projects which I found interesting. I worked on a chess site for a bit. I was really into chess, so I worked on that a little bit. But my motivation just isn't, I just don't have the love for it. So I work on it mainly for the additional income. And I feel bad because I've stopped a few side projects. I've just stopped working on them because I just didn't make the time. Not that I didn't have the time. I could have made time for them. But I just didn't enjoy it. And it's exactly what we mentioned earlier. You're working, 9 to 5, and then you finish work, and then you're working again outside of your relaxation hours.
Yeah.
And that I just find so hard to do. Even the additional money just isn't enough for me.
But by the same regard, when it is something that you're really you're not even consciously connected to it, it's just so inherently you're passionate about whatever it is that you're building. You'll do what I did a couple of weeks ago and stay up till 4 a.m.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
And the challenge, the problem that I find is that motivation comes and is very fleeting.
Yes.
I'll have 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month of every weekend. I'm like, I can't wait to get home. I can't wait to finish work so I can just jump on the computer and keep going with that project. But then you hit one of those analysis paralysis points where you're trying to decide maybe I should follow MVC, or I should do clean architecture here, or maybe I should, and it all drops off so quickly.
Speaking my language.
Yep.
The SEEK Conductor that I mentioned earlier, I feel that way about that all the time. I come up with an idea where I'm like, oh my God, it would be so good if I could. But the challenge of me figuring out how to do it is because tough now.
That one decision I know exactly what you're talking about because I get the same way. I get extremely excited about design. I love being in the room. When I used to work in games, the part that I love the most is before you start building anything. When you're just putting ideas to paper, I love that process. I get really amped up and excited about it. But then actually building the functionality you're talking about, maybe 80% of it is stuff you already know.
Yeah.
And the 20% you don't know takes so much effort to get there that I'm like, I don't want to do the 80% to learn the 20%.
Yeah, I certainly find with side projects, they are things you can just pick up out of nowhere. That you can you pick it up at 11 p.m., finish at 4 a.m. It's that inspiration that kind of is where that comes from. Whereas side work, you're committed to someone. There's usually someone on the other end expecting work, and it feels like a chore. It doesn't feel the same, and you can't just drop it really. Unless you say, okay, I quit. But you're burning bridges. There is none of that kind of commitment that you really have to worry with side projects, which is what I like about side projects.
But the reality is that whether it's a project or you're getting paid for it, at some point, I don't think you can avoid that feeling that it's work eventually.
Yeah.
I've never worked on a side project or a side hustle or anything like that where you didn't eventually have to summon motivation out of nothingness to do it.
Yeah.
And I feel like people should be prepared for that and go into a project fully aware that they're going to hit those slumps where they aren't motivated. And that's where having some extrinsic, external, intrinsic, extrinsic, money,
Yes.
money, or having a bigger GitHub portfolio that you can use for employment. Whenever I've needed those things, it was easy. It was easy to get through I'm not as passionate, but I know I need to do it because I had something that I needed to get out of it. And that's why if I could roll back a month and a half, I probably would not start a project that does nothing just for the learning. I would try to solve a problem. And then instead of doing one thing that gives me all the learning, just find small micro problems that give you micro learning.
That little bit.
In existing code bases, open source stuff.
Too.
So that you don't have to go through the mud of making that 80% worth of decisions that you already are comfortable with to learn the 20%. Find an open source code base. Find a problem that you're interested in solving within an open source code base and then work on that.
I just want to touch on that smaller increments bit because I think the thing that really would have saved some of my side projects is I was trying to do too much too fast. Too many things at once. Instead of slowly incrementing, I'm going to have it magic and melee and this and this, and I'm going to do all these things. And I started small and just being all I need to do is render a map. That's it. I don't have anything else. I can't move. I can't do anything to start with that. I think you'll find it's a lot more motivating because your feedback loop is much, much quicker. Take a small problem and solve that and build that and get the dopamine hit from building that thing and then move on to the next one. If you try to architect this entire system from the get-go, you're going to find it's very demotivating. What would help, though, is what Seamus said, designing it like on paper without actually writing code, be like, this is the end goal that I want to work towards. Let's take one small thing and start with that, do that thing, and then move on to the next.
And if you're lucky, you can be like Zuckerberg and your side project can turn into a multi-billion-dollar company. You never know. Let's wrap up. Anyone got anything else they want to mention about side projects?
I think that's a really good point at the end there. First thing you do when you build a game is make a character controller. You got to give the character the ability to walk.
Yeah.
Right. So baby steps. Like the first thing you build is the ability to walk, and then once you can move around the screen and interact with stuff, everything else is just a tiny little piece.
Yeah.
I love it. There we go. Right back into season 2. There we go. SEEK Bytes.
See you next time.
See ya.